Heiress snaps, "Stop looking at my lips." Her black bodyguard smirks. "Then stop pouting." The mansion stood in a world of its own, where silence spoke louder than words and every polished surface reflected power. The young heiress walked through it like a queen who needed no one, her heels tapping sharp against marble floors. She was beautiful, proud, and untouchable. At least that's what she wanted everyone to believe. But after the threats, her father refused to take chances. He hired someone different, a man whose calm strength seemed carved from experience, a black bodyguard whose eyes carried stories he never told. From the moment he arrived, the atmosphere changed. He didn't bow or flatter, didn't act impressed by her wealth. He just observed, steady and unreadable, moving like a shadow that always knew where she'd be next. She hated it. She wasn't used to someone who didn't chase her approval. So she pushed him, testing him with impossible orders and biting remarks. Yet he never reacted. He simply did his job, silently, efficiently, as though her words meant nothing. That indifference irritated her more than insults ever could. One evening, they were leaving a gala. Cameras flashed, people whispered, and she felt the familiar mask slide over her face. Graceful, untouchable, perfect. But as she slipped into the car, she noticed his eyes on her. At least, that's what it looked like. Her temper snapped before reason could catch up. "Stop looking at my lips," she said sharply, turning toward him. For a second, there was only silence. Then, the corners of his mouth lifted into the smallest smirk, and he replied in a calm, low voice, "Then stop pouting." The words hung in the air between them like fire and smoke. She blinked, caught off guard, unsure whether to be furious or flustered. No one had ever dared talk to her like that. But there was something about the way he said it, steady, teasing, almost protective, that made her heart skip a beat. She looked away, pretending it meant nothing, though her pulse betrayed her. After that, something changed she couldn't explain. The air between them carried tension she could feel even when he wasn't in the room. His silence no longer annoyed her. It comforted her. She started to notice the way he would subtly position himself between her and the crowd, or how his gaze softened when he thought she wasn't looking. Yet he remained professional, never crossing a line. The memory of that night replayed in her mind more often than she wanted to admit. His voice, that teasing calmness, it lingered, breaking through walls she didn't know she had. She told herself it was irritation, but deep down she knew it was something else. That night, for the first time, she realized that maybe the guard hired to protect her body had unknowingly disarmed her heart. The days after that night unfolded differently, as if the air itself had shifted between them. The heiress found herself aware of things she had never noticed before. The quiet rhythm of his footsteps behind her, the way his gaze followed every movement in a room without ever seeming invasive, and how effortlessly he seemed to know when she needed space and when she didn't. His presence was like a shield, silent yet powerful, and though she told herself she didn't need it, she had begun to depend on it. At first, she thought it was just curiosity. But each time their eyes met, even for a fraction of a second, something unspoken flickered between them, something too fragile to name. In the reflection of glass walls and passing cars, their gazes connected, then quickly broke apart. She wondered if he felt it too, the pull, the tension, the strange comfort that came with his nearness. He never acted differently, never stepped beyond the line of professionalism. But his silence carried more meaning than most people's words. When she lost her temper with a client, he simply stood there, arms crossed, calm as ever, waiting for her to breathe again. When she tripped on a marble stair, his hand caught her waist before she even fell, firm but careful, his touch steadying her heartbeat more than her balance. That night, as rain poured against the mansion windows, thunder rumbling in the distance, she found him standing by the glass, eyes fixed on the storm. For reasons she couldn't explain, she approached him. The sound of rain softened her usual sharpness. "Why did you take this job?" she asked, her tone quieter than she intended. He turned slightly, his expression unreadable, and for a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said in a low voice, "Because protecting people like you keeps me from remembering what I've lost." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of something heavy, something broken. She wanted to ask what he meant, but the sadness in his eyes stopped her. Instead, she stood beside him, both staring out into the storm, listening to the rain trace stories down the glass. It was the first time she felt something real between them, something that wasn't built on arguments or pride. The following days only deepened that feeling. She caught herself waiting for his voice, even though he rarely spoke unless necessary. When he did, his calm tone seemed to ground her. He began to appear not just as a bodyguard, but as a quiet anchor in a world of noise. And, though she tried to deny it, she missed him even when he was in the next room. Every accidental touch lingered longer than it should. Every look carried an echo of that night in the rain. The heiress who once believed she needed no one was beginning to realize that her safety didn't come from the walls around her, but from the man who stood silently beside her, watching, protecting, and, unknowingly, slowly claiming her heart. It happened so quickly that she barely had time to breathe. One moment they were stepping out of the car after a meeting, the streetlights flickering softly in the evening air, and the next, chaos erupted. A dark figure darted from the shadows, a flash of movement followed by the sound of shattering glass. Everything blurred together. The rush of footsteps, the echo of her scream, and the heavy weight that pushed her to the ground. When she opened her eyes, he was there, between her and danger, shielding her with his body as the attacker fled into the night. The world tilted around her. Blood trickled down his arm, his breath uneven, yet his eyes stayed fixed on her, steady and protective. "You're safe," he murmured before collapsing into her arms. Those two words burned into her chest like a promise. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and fear. Hours passed as she sat beside his bed, her elegant dress torn, her hands trembling from the memory. For the first time, the heiress who never cried felt her own tears fall uncontrollably. The man who had always seemed unshakable now lay still, pale and silent. Every heartbeat she heard from the monitor was a reminder that he had risked his life for hers. She replayed the moment over and over, haunted by the sound of his body hitting the ground. When he finally stirred, groaning softly, she shot up from her chair, gripping his hand like it was the only thing keeping her anchored to reality. His eyelids fluttered open, and despite the pain, his lips curved into a faint, teasing smile. "You're still here," he whispered, his voice weak but familiar. She tried to speak, but her throat tightened. Anger, relief, fear, they all mixed into something she couldn't name. "Why?" she finally asked, her voice breaking through the silence. "Why would you do that? Why would you risk your life for me?" He turned his head slightly, his dark eyes locking onto hers with that same calm that had always both irritated and comforted her. "Because even when you snap at me," he said softly, "I see who you really are. You just don't see it yet." The room fell silent again, but the meaning behind his words struck deeper than she wanted to admit. She felt something stir inside her, something raw and unfamiliar. She squeezed his hand tighter, afraid to let go, afraid to face the realization forming in her heart. As the night deepened, she stayed by his side, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. The heiress who once believed she needed no one now sat beside the man who had proven her wrong in the most painful, beautiful way possible. Every sound of the machines, every flicker of the dim hospital light reminded her how fragile life could be. She wasn't scared of the danger anymore. She was scared of losing the one person who had seen her for who she truly was, behind all the walls, behind all the pride. And in that quiet, trembling moment, she finally understood. He hadn't just protected her life. He had become the reason she wanted to live it. When he finally recovered, the mansion felt colder than before. Days passed in quiet tension, as if both were pretending not to feel what had already changed. She walked through halls that once felt safe, but now echoed with the absence of his presence. Every sound reminded her of him, the steady rhythm of his footsteps, the calm tone of his voice, the quiet authority that had once kept her world in balance. When she saw him again, standing in the foyer with his bag on the floor, she froze. His contract had ended, and though she had every excuse to renew it, she didn't. She told herself that distance was the right thing, that the line between them should never have blurred. Yet, as she looked at him now, packing away the last traces of his stay, her chest ached with something unfamiliar and unbearable. He didn't notice her at first, or maybe he did and chose not to react. His movements were careful, methodical, just like everything he did. When she finally spoke, her voice was smaller than she wanted it to be. "You're leaving without saying goodbye?" The words slipped out, almost trembling. He turned, his expression calm but guarded, as if he had prepared for this moment. "You wanted distance, remember?" he said softly. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Instead, she took a slow step forward. "Maybe I was wrong," she whispered, her tone breaking in the middle. The silence that followed felt heavy, filled with all the things neither of them dared to say. For a long moment he studied her face, his eyes tracing every flicker of hesitation. He didn't move closer, but the space between them seemed to shrink. "You'll be fine," he said finally, his voice firm but low, as though he was trying to convince himself too. "You don't need me." She smiled faintly, a sad, shaky smile that betrayed everything she was feeling. "Maybe I don't," she said, "but I want you to stay." The confession hung in the air, raw and fragile. He exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing just a little. Then, in a tone laced with quiet amusement, he murmured, "Then stop pouting." The same teasing line from weeks ago, only this time it didn't sting. It softened everything. She laughed under her breath, her tears catching the light as they fell. He stepped closer, almost without realizing it, and for a heartbeat neither of them moved. There were no grand gestures, no declarations of love, just a quiet understanding that spoke louder than words. She reached for his hand, and he didn't pull away. In that simple touch, all the walls she'd built around her heart finally crumbled. For the first time, she didn't feel like an untouchable heiress or a woman guarded by pride. She felt human, seen, and safe. And as he looked down at her, a soft smile curving his lips, she knew that even if he walked out the door, he would never truly leave her world. Because somewhere between duty and desire he had become a part of her she could never let go.